guess what we can start, actually just a little bit closer, just for the sound. So if you want to, do you want to start off by just saying some thoughts about having women in leadership roles, or you can start with whichever story you want to start with. So,
I was thinking one of the questions that you raised were, would you want me to look into the camera, or?
Yeah, once you, yeah. And I can just look here, so I'm not staring at you while you're trying to look here.
Because one of the things you were talking about was, do women in leadership positions make a difference? And I would say that, what we heard yesterday are a lot of interesting figures about how women in leading positions actually do make a difference. But what I think makes a difference with women in leading positions is that we have actually a different way of using our positions. We have a different culture, and this is regardless of where you are from. If you're from the Scandinavian countries, or if you're from the Arab world, it doesn't matter. It's what you do. You don't compete for power in the same way as men. Men very often want positions because it gives them a position of power, and they don't necessarily cooperate. They do not necessarily look at issues primarily. They look at their interests primarily. I know that there are many men who are exceptions to this, but women have a different way of being issue focused, and have less need for pushing themselves forward, and more need for pushing the issue forward. And that makes a whole lot of difference, because women would gladly cooperate with others. They work in teams. Men like hierarchical systems, where there's a boss and there's someone who obeys. Women like teams. Women like to have a dialogue. Women like to take everyone else into account. Women are much better at creating consensus. Women are much better at listening to small groups, to minorities, and take them into account. So I would say that with women in leading positions, you will most probably have a much higher quality of the democracy. You will have a real culture of democracy, or at least be closer to a real culture of democracy with women in leading positions, because we have different objectives than men do. Our objectives are to use this position to do the things that we want to do, that are important for society. Men sometimes use their positions to do that, but very often they use it for themselves. It's like being out hunting for the dinner in prehistoric times. They do not necessarily think about sharing the dinner with everyone. So I think this is both my experience, my own experience, and I believe also that it's scientifically proven that women work together in a different way than men do, which increases the quality of the decisions, the quality of democracy, and also will eventually leads to a better country.
Could you talk a little bit about an instance where in your career that you tried to, or you needed to work in a coalition, and who was in that coalition, how you went about forming it, what were some of the lessons learned from it, and the strengths and perhaps weaknesses of working in a coalition?
One such thing that I remember very clearly happened a long time ago. It was when I was still in the youth organization of my party, and we had a party congress coming up. One thing that we had been discussing was how to get more women into politics, and we were very much in favor of having quotas, internal voluntary quotas in our party, so that every time for the elections, our party should, according to our opinion, put forward a party list where every other person is a woman and every other person a man. So if the first name is a man, then the second name must be a woman, and the other way around. This was something that we were convinced of was necessary because we were so upset with the inequality in politics. And this was about 30 years ago, actually. There was also a women's group within the party. It was quite weak, and it was not strong enough to push issues and get everyone else to listen to them. And then we had a few progressive men in the party who were open to our ideas. So we created a coalition between the youth, between the women, and also some of the more progressive men. And when it was time for the party congress, we cooperated, we set up a little organization to make sure that every regional party delegation was being drawn into the discussion, so that we mapped out who would be a problem and maybe had particular talks to that person. During the debate, we divided up the arguments, who would be arguing what and when. And we had a pretty effective, efficient little campaign machinery. And that was a beautiful coalition. And actually a coalition that we used after that several times, because it worked so well. We discovered that we had a number of things in common, and we won. My party was the first party actually to adopt voluntary internal quotas for women in party lists. And some 10 years later or so, other parties finally came around to doing the same thing. And when we had that critical mass of parties, who all, well, more than half actually of the Swiss political parties, who all adopted the voluntary quotas, that immediately had an enormous effect on the composition of our parliament. So all of a sudden there were more than 40% women in parliament. So when I was elected to parliament, I was one of those 40%. And I'll always think of that, what an important lesson it gave to me, that even if you are a small group and you think that you are not in a position to tell the greater group, in this case our party, what to do, you can create coalitions if you identify who else is out there who would share my views on this particular issue, and just isolate that issue and build a coalition on that.
And what happened to those that didn't agree with your point of view on coalitions in the aftermath of your success?
Many of the other parties were absolutely against, and are still today dead against, quotas, both legal quotas and voluntary quotas for their own party. But of course, they can't say anything about the majority of the parties in Sweden who do have voluntary quotas. What happened is that they felt the pressure, because when there was that critical mass of parties who wanted to promote women, they felt that, oh, maybe we need to do something. And all of a sudden, their lists were also full of women, which they had not been before. So even though they claim that they do not have quotas, of course, they are looking for women in order to make sure that the list is balanced. And this is a direct effect of our campaign.
And can you think of an instance in your career, either in Parliament or elsewhere, where you needed to reach across and connect with someone, or yes, to reach someone who had a completely opposing political view as you held strongly? Could you talk about maybe an instance that occurred like that?
I was, during my years in Parliament, I was primarily working with issues such as refugee policy, asylum policy, immigration, and so forth. And I had no problem in my party, because they were absolutely with me on this issue. I wanted to reform our refugee policy to be more pronounced in favor of support and protecting people's human rights. And unfortunately, the major parties, including the government, were against. So, but there were a few other persons and parties that I could build coalitions with on this issue. And one of them was the former Communist Party. And as much as I hate communism, being a liberal myself, I could see that on this issue we had something in common. And I'll never forget the many debates that we had together. Me and some of these people who would even um, uh, who would hail the leaders of the Soviet Union and Russia and readily go to Moscow and to get medals for being faithful to Soviet communism and I don't know what. And still, they would cooperate extremely well with me on this particular issue of improving our Swedish asylum procedures. And we were such good friends, and we even made trips together to do fact-finding missions on refugee issues. And I will always cherish the memory of those people, not just in the Communist Party, but also in the other parties, that we had this very, very nice understanding with. And we did influence politics, actually. A few of the things that we were pushing for actually finally made it into the Swedish legislation, which I'm very happy about.
And how did you make that first initial reach out to them?
I think that, you notice, you look at what are the other parties' positions, and you realize that in that party that you really detest, on this particular issue, they seem to be pretty good. And you notice because they maybe would put forward questions to the minister, and then I would join in the debates, and then you realize that there is a pattern. There are a few people who are really engaged because they put questions to ministers, they would write parliamentary motions and so forth, and then eventually we grew a little network before the word was even invented.
And if you have time, I have just to follow. Why do you think women's quotas are important?
There is no democracy without women in equal proportion. You cannot call it a democracy. That is ridiculous. So if you're serious about having a democracy, there's no way you can do without women. And if this does not come naturally, I'll tell you, it does not come naturally. The only efficient way of having women in politics, as long as we have a world dominated by male structures, and we do, is to have either voluntary quotas or legal quotas or any kind of quotas. But think of this, men have always had quotas in politics. They have always been quoted into politics because of their gender. Men are there because of their gender. So it is only right that women also should be there because of their gender, because without the equal balance between the two, there is absolutely no democracy.
And all to keep quotas forever, or?
Well, until we have broken the pattern of disregarding women in politics.
And final question, can you maybe talk a little bit about working together with other women parliamentarians and why that was important?
We had a very nice way of working together with some of the women parliamentarians across the board when I was a member of parliament. We used to meet for a breakfast meeting and bring up issues of common concern. And in spite of the different ideologies, of course, we all knew that it was difficult to be a woman in politics. It was more difficult then at that time than it is now, but it's still difficult. And we shared their experience, and there was, you didn't need to spend time to explain that, because we all knew, and still today, there is an immediate sisterhood that I feel with all the women that I ever knew in politics, regardless of the party, because we share the same experience, and we know what it is like, how difficult it is to create a space for women in politics. We discussed a number of things, and sometimes we actually did cooperate. And one of the issues that we cooperated on, not all women, but there was a certain group across the board, was on particular problems for women, violence against women and prostitution and things like that. We pushed for laws criminalizing the customers of prostitution, the men buying prostitutes. And that eventually actually became a law in Sweden. So today, the woman is not criminal when she is when she sells her sexual services. She is not regarded as a criminal. The man who is buying it is regarded as a criminal. And it was considered to be a very brave and strange idea initially. But with the this little coalition, this understanding between the active women in all the different parties in Parliament, all of us in our respective parties were pushing for the idea, and eventually we grew an understanding. And in the end, you have to have patience in politics. In the end, we actually won the debate.
Thank you. Is there, before I turn this off, is there any last things that you want to share, or any thoughts? Or not that you don't need to, but if you'd like to.
There is a special place in heaven for women who do not help each other. I think that we women, we expect to be helped by our sisters, and I think that is correct. We need to support one another. We need to create that sisterhood, regardless of what interests we represent, our internal differences. It is important for us to strengthen that sisterhood. It goes also to the next generation. When you have a position somewhere, in politics or in any other area, you must make sure that you don't do the mistakes, again, that women have done in the past, of not helping the next generation of women coming up. That is what men do. They pick out their successors, they groom them, they give them possibilities, they give them platforms, and then there is a next generation of male leaders. We women have to do the same. We have to groom our successors, the next generation of women, and give them space so that they can grow and become even better political leaders than we are.
It's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.